So the first step to creating a form that will work with PHP is actually creating the HTML that's going to house the initial form. We're going to create a feedback form that's going to take the user salutation, their name, email address, a response, and some comments. The code that's going to be generated is going to go between traditional HTML form opening and closing tags. I'll go ahead and quickly build the form file. I'm just going to create a basic HTML5 page. I'm going to link out to an external style sheet, and then I'll begin by building the actual form itself. Now this form is going to be very simple. I'm not going to focus on any of the normal form elements that you might incorporate, such as label tags that would go along with the input or selection boxes. As I mentioned earlier in the course, I'm assuming that you already understand how to format HTML, so the focus of this course is of course the PHP. I did want to mention though that when you make a form, you will always have the action attribute, and the action attribute is going to dictate what is going to happen once the form data has been submitted. This value is one of the most important considerations when you're creating a form. In this course, we're going to be pointing to our PHP script. So we're going to have to create a PHP file that is going to handle parsing the form elements. We'll be building that PHP file in a couple minutes, but first we're going to create the HTML form. So for right now, I'm going to leave the value for the action attribute blank. The other attribute that you're going to pass on to a form is going to be the method. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. So for now, I'm going to leave that value blank as well. Let's jump into actually building the form itself. I'm going to be building my form using HTML5. HTML5 has some great form element types, such as email, number, and URL, which are really well supported in all of the newest browsers. They're going to provide additional benefits over simple text input fields. They have built-in browser-based validation and better user experience. HTML5 also introduces a required attribute that prevents a form from being submitted without a value entered or selected. So for this form, I'm just going to wrap each of the elements inside of paragraph tags. I'll go ahead and write the text that's going to represent what this form is all about. The first one is going to use a select element, and for the name, I'm going to use title. I'm also going to assign an ID of title. This isn't needed for what we're going to do with the PHP, but it is best practice. I'll also specify that this is a required field. Inside my select box, I'm going to add several options. The options are going to be for the salutation. So the first one is going to be for Mr., then we'll add Mrs. and Miss. After my select field, I'm going to add an input text field. This is going to house the user's name. We'll also specify that this is a required field. Now I'm going to add some other elements to my form. This will be email, and we'll add some radio buttons for response. Finally, I'll add the submit button so that the user is able to submit my form. If we save the page and we look at it in the browser, I basically have a very basic form. Let me just add a little bit of text to the radio buttons. All right, now we have a basic form that the user can enter some information and then go ahead and submit their form. As you can see, we're using some basic form elements, a select box, some text boxes, radio buttons, a text area box, and my form currently is being styled by some basic CSS that I've already created. Here's what my CSS looks like, and I just have basic CSS that is going to format my page a little bit differently than the defaults, but none of these things are too specific to any of the outcomes of what we're ultimately going to be building. Now that I have the form built, I'm ready to start working with some of the other elements that I'm going to need to make this form interactive. Because currently, if I try to submit my form, it's going to give me some information to fill out the required fields. But if I actually click send my feedback, the form doesn't do anything. It's just going to clear out the elements. And if we look up here in the URL, you can see that after the name of the file, there's a question mark, and then it's saying title Miss, and name equals Jane, and email equals Jane Doe, and so on and so forth. So it is going ahead and printing the information. We're going to be talking in the next movie about what this information means, and we're going to choose a method, and then we'll start building the actual PHP. It is worth noting that this HTML page that we built is an HTML file. Even though we're going to be using PHP to parse the form, we don't actually have to create the form itself using PHP. It can just be created with standard HTML.